Just before we jump to the discussions, the National Assembly complex was built in 1999, a legislative building at a cost of nearly $35.18 million. This according to Wikipedia. That's about 7 million at the time, billion rather, at the time. But now that's over 12 billion naira, and the contract was awarded to ITB Nigeria February 18th of 1996 through the Department of Public Building, FCDA, in Abuja. Well, since the president approved this spending, a number of criticisms have trailed the renovation budget for the National Assembly. But for more perspective on the issue, in the studio is the senior advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Yemi Candidate Johnson. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
While via telephone, we have the Director of Information of the National Assembly, Mr. Rawlings Agada. He joins us from Benue. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas. But let's start with, perhaps let's start with you, Mr. Agada. You're the Director of Information at the National Assembly, and I'm sure you've heard all the criticisms as to why we need the 37 billion naira to renovate the National Assembly. What more can you tell us as to why we're spending that much for the renovation?
Well, thank you for granting us the opportunity to say our own side of the story. I'm aware this issue has gone beyond the appropriation process. Now it's an act of the National Assembly, and SERAP too has taken steps too, but because with well other that action was of the interest of the public. But if you have to ask me, I state emphatically clear that if you say there's a need to renovate, there's a need to renovate the National Assembly, and I think that is overstated because the infrastructure itself, just like you rightly said in your prelude, has been on the ground since 1999. And it is likely to a beautiful human being walking on the street and suddenly collapse. You say, what happened to him? As managers of the estate, the management under the leadership of my boss, the clerk of the National Assembly, I think that process started right from the 7th, 8th Assembly when certain structural defects were noticed right in the two main chambers of the National Assembly. And the doom that you see that is the catchy picture of the National Assembly all over the world. And that for us was the concern, considering the fact that that building has well over 10,000 human beings on a daily basis, and to imagine that we allowed that to happen. Somebody will ask this question again. Why didn't you raise these issues when it came to that point? And I think that's what the Night Assembly took off from, and they were able to discuss that effectively with the managers of our economy, who said that the need to meet the board on time to save so many lives was important. And I can say this is our position. This is our position at the National Assembly management that those issues have been raised. And the other question to ask is that amount of money coming to the National Assembly? But I think that answer is clearly stated in the budget. That budget is under the Federal Capital Development Authority, who are the custodians of all development within the Federal Capital Territory, particularly so when it deals with critical national infrastructures like the National Assembly, the Supreme Court, the Federal Secretariat, and the Villa. Those are issues that no one can contest with. But to say the timing is not appropriate, I guess where I leave it to all to see is this, that when in the National Assembly, there are over 230 media houses, both local and international, that are covering National Assembly. You can assess the facilities yourself. I don't have the detail because I'm not professionally to tell you what are the structural defects and all that. But from my examination, physical examination, as a participant and user of that facility, I know that that place is overstretched beyond the population that comes in there. And maybe too, we put this clear, that the National Assembly has basis of development. And among the three arms of government, that is the least developed arm of government.
All right, hold on, Mr. Agada. Let's hear from our guest in Lagos, Mr. Candidate Johnson. 37 billion, too much for our National Assembly edifice?
Well, it's a comparative question. The way I see this dedication of funds is by comparing it to the allocations that the federal government has made to other basic necessities such as health and education. It's quite clear that by placing the National Assembly's renovation in the same mathematical paradigm as those other expenditures, that somebody thinks that the renovation of the National Assembly is a basic necessity of life for Nigerians. Of course it's not. It's a huge amount of money by any standards, but in the circumstances which I've just indicated and the circumstances where basic national infrastructure, life-saving infrastructure is relegated to second or third place, then I would regard it as grossly insensitive at the very least. It shows such a contempt for the people that those who are representing them would, one, allocate themselves this large amount of funding to build a house, which is what it is. It's a meeting place. And I think it shows considerable contempt that in spite of the outrage that seems to have grown about this event, that there's no coordinated public relations response to what is a scandal in reality, and that on a show like this, you have an official who is not able to speak on behalf of the leadership of the National Assembly to explain in a credible and coherent way why this expenditure is required.
Mr. Geda, would you like to respond to that? Our guest in the studio says this is a contempt for the people and quite a scandal, and he disagrees looking at some of the examples he's given, this amount compared to other basic necessities for the people.
Well, like I rightly said, my mandate is not to join the issue with anybody. I'm supposed to put the facts the way it is. Whatever the decision of the people is, the National Assembly, in their wisdom, have taken that step, which has been ascended to the president. And like I rightly said, the better body now that will give you a better detail, insight into what we're talking about should be the Federal Capital Development Authority, not the National Assembly. Not the National Assembly.
Is it possible that... Is it possible that when you perhaps hear some of the calls for on the renovation, that perhaps you can, maybe the Assembly can decide and retrace their steps and review the amount by any chance?
Well, I don't think that is within our that is within our. If that decision is to be taken, it should be taken by the government, who already has approved of it. It has gone through the letter. You cannot expect that such budget will be passed without going through necessary due diligence to ascertain if those things are real, are factual, and we do not have those competence to do that because that is within the purview of the Federal Capital Development, who oversees such national infrastructures, critical national infrastructure on behalf of the federal government.
Right.
And I think that they are technically competent to tell Nigerians what is in the 37 billion. Because that 37 billion is not warehouse of the National Assembly capital provisions. That is clear, and anybody can verify that.
Let's ask the senior advocate. Let's ask the senior advocate. I mean, something that's already an act. Can they go back to correct that? What SERAP and the other civil society organizations are doing, how successful do you think they will be?
Well, I'm not sure the basis for SERAP's legal action. It's a public policy issue, and it's a public interest issue, so I think this is what they represent. It is an act of National Assembly. It's been passed by the National Assembly. What is at issue here is not the legality of the acts that are taken, but the sense of responsibility with which executive and legislative power is exercised. It's not sufficient to say I have the power, I can appropriate your money for any purpose. It is necessary and responsible to explain to people why you're appropriating such a huge amount of money for the purposes of renovating a building in which you work when there are other things that people need. And it's contemptuous, having done it, not to consider that this is a significant matter that requires a systematic response by the leadership of the National Assembly. With all respect to Mr. Agada, he's not a leader of the National Assembly and nobody elected him.
But he is the Director of Information, and he said there are so many key things, renovations, that need to be done for something that hasn't been done since 1999.
I'll take his word for it, but it's not for us to take his word. I mean, I may personally take his word for it, but it's something that has to be explained. It is a startling appropriation, that is clear. If you make such a startling appropriation, which is comparative to the allocations made for health, for education, then surely you must explain what is the emergency that affects the people on the street. I think that people who are in the comfort of legislative chambers often consider that they have acquired a privilege for whatever reason, and that they can forget about the people who sent them there until it's time to be re-elected, and then they either be persuaded or bludgeoned into giving support. I think that contempt is something that people are entitled to resent.
All right, we'll wrap up on this discussion. We'd like to crave your indulgence. Mr. Agada, if you can hold the line. Still to come on the program, more on over-bloated government in Nigeria. We'll bring you details when we return. Well, we'll continue our discussions with the budget renovation for the National Assembly. We've been talking to our guest, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Yemi Candidate Johnson, in our Lagos studio, and the Director of Information at the National Assembly, Mr. Rawlings Agada, who joins us via telephone from Benue. Wrapping up, Mr. Agada, this is perhaps your thoughts summarily on all of this, seeing as I think a newspaper now, Nigerian News Point, they listed 7 things that perhaps the Nigerian government, the National Assembly, can do with 37 billion naira. And some of them include feeding 9.7 million primary school pupils for 3 months. They talked about building 925 primary healthcare centers, and so many more things that they feel that money should be used for. So in your final position as the Director of Information, how do you want people to see legislators representing their best interests as representatives in the National Assembly?
Well, I think this is dragging beyond my own mandate. I don't have that mandate for the legislature. I've spoken for the 2 houses, which you all are aware. But if you ask me as a Nigerian, to start with who I am, I'm constitutionally speak as a Nigerian beyond my official capacity. I think that all those issues that have been raised are issues of national concern, and that includes the renovation of the National Assembly. And I think that governance is all about authoritative allocation of scarce resources for the good of all. And I don't see such projects, running one cycle of projects. Over time, you find out that those provisions are there, and sometimes if the funds are not available, they are done in phases. I am not in any way contesting those because I'm a Nigerian, and in any way we can make life better for the entire country is the best interest of the institution that I represent. But I have this particular concern as a Nigerian too, that the National Assembly is being singled out as a government in a government, which shouldn't be. The National Assembly should be seen as an equal partner in the development of this country, and they need to have the best of place in their own way of making sure that they do the right thing, which is making the peace and good governance of our country. And I know that most of us today that are speaking will be speaking from the public narrative that are the center of the national. I think this new National Assembly leadership are really focused to change those narratives, and I know that they are listening to all of us and even to these views that we have. And I know that if there are any other ways within the peace resolution process that is available to all. I think one of them now is the constitutional process that is being approached by the SERAP and others. And I know that all the actions that have been taken is really constitutional mandate of everybody. If the courts in their wisdom believe that the National Assembly do not have power appropriate, constitutionally provided for them, so be it. And I think we as public servants are there to take orders. And in this instance, I'm going to put it in the public domain that 37 billion is not going into the hands of the leadership of the National Assembly or my host, Chief Sani Omolobi, who happens to be the Chief Accounting Officer of National Assembly, to appropriate how this money will be deploying the renovations. That has been captured in the appropriate MDA that should supervise such projects.
All right. All right. Finally, to you, is it enough that the FCDA is in charge of the sums, or perhaps is this something that has come up from when the former Senator Shehu Sani revealed how much the National Assembly was gulping in terms of, running their offices, and perhaps Nigerians now have that bias that there's just a lot of money going into the National Assembly.
Well, it's very clear that the National Assembly is a huge drain on the nation's resources. I'm not convinced myself that we need a permanent bicameral legislature which is peopled by so many people who are effectively cost centers and make no contribution to the accrual of the income that they spend. It's like inviting somebody into your house and he heads straight for the fridge and starts eating your stuff and moving into your bedroom. But the important point I think to make, apart from the whole, we tend to hide behind procedures and technicalities and have we complied. We use law as a defense for multiple misconducts. The simple and basic fact is this: all public office is a trust to be exercised in the public interest. Each time an officer, no matter the legality and the protection that he encodes himself with procedures and rules and the fancy names and titles, the question every public office holder must ask when you appropriate the money that belongs to the people is this appropriation, in the light of all my responsibility to the public, is this appropriate? Is it responsible? If you breach a trust in private life, you are liable to be removed. If you breach the trust of the public in government, you render your position to govern untenable. The only thing that then maintains it is the form and force. And you will start by people being resentful, then at some point they may be fearful, but eventually people will become defiant, and the foundations of government cannot take this kind of
Are you disappointed that the executive passed this, made the approval?
I'm astounded. I consider that government is a matter of gravity and judgment, and that people who hold high office should exercise judgment, legal judgment, political judgment, social judgment. They should decide whether, in respect of contending needs, how do you apply the resources of the nation? If you do so with this level of insensitivity and perhaps even recklessness, then one doubts the exercise of judgment in the highest echelons of the government.
All right, we appreciate your time. Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Yemi Candidate Johnson, thank you for joining us. And also, Director of Information, National Assembly, Mr. Rawlings Agada, thank you for joining us all the way from Benue. Wish you both happy holidays.